Hello, everyone. We welcome you to another episode of the Cosmic Matrix podcast with your hosts, Bernhard Günther and my wife, Laura Matsu. And here we explore a very big topic about the Yuga Cycle, the Yuga shift, and ask the question, is the Kali Yuga ending in 2025? Has it already ended? There's much debate out there in this day and age. But the bigger question I ask myself sometimes is, have you ever truly wondered why the world is the way it is, right? Yes, there's a lot of beauty, goodness, and love. We can see that absolutely. But if we're honest with ourselves and without falling into any sort of black-pilled pessimistic mindset, it's undeniable that there's a lot of darkness, suffering, corruption, lies, and rising polarization. We live in a world where pathologies have become normalized, while most people project their suppressed shadow onto others, while portraying themselves as the good, moral, and virtuous ones. And if you're really honest, especially with ourselves, most of us have no idea who we are beyond this mask of personality, of who we think we are, and the identities we are taking or have taken on. And beneath it all really sits a deep shadow of unconscious grief, sadness, shame, guilt, anger, and rage, which we try to hide with external means and distractions. As Carl Jung knew very well, whatever darkness we see out there in the external world also lives within us. We don't know who we are. Most of what we think we want or who we think we are has been programmed into us by culture and social norms. Religion has become corrupted and dogmatic over centuries, manipulated for social control, and really distorted from its original teachings. But instead of turning inward, which is really the core message of all the spiritual teachings throughout the ages, many of us blame others for the state of the world or for the hardships in our lives. We blame parents, ex-partners, governments, media, the elite, the cabal, or Zionists, anyone really in positions of power, in a desperate search for the boogeyman we believe is responsible for all the evil. And then we cling to the fantasy or almost childish wish that if we could get rid of that one thing, that one person, that one group out there, everything will be fine. At the same time, we still believe technology will save us. We imagine AI and robotics will usher us into a golden age of abundance. We identify with the physical body, worship youth, fear aging and death, and try to extend life with artificial means and cosmetic illusions. But the truth is we are living in the most extreme age of materialism. It's a spiritual dark age. And the dark forces, the forces of darkness, spiritual forces, have a strong grip because we have lost our connection to the divine. We either project human qualities onto God as a punishing or rewarding human-type figure, or we deny the divine altogether and worship the atheist materialistic mindset. And the most cunning deception of all is that we mistake technological advancement for spiritual evolution. But our inner life has not changed much at all. If you look closely, actually, it has degraded over thousands of years. That's something we'll explore in depth here. But conventional history is trapped in a dense worldview of materialism and a narrow Darwinian lens. It misses the most important factor, which is a spiritual framework for understanding humanity, history, and the evolution of consciousness. But deep in our ancient memory, we know there was once a golden age, a time of harmony and really spiritual unity, and that it also can return. And I believe that something like that we remember within ourselves, even unconsciously. And that spark really keeps humanity going despite its drive towards self-destruction. So with that being said, here are the good news. Ancient wisdom has preserved a map of vast cycles that determine the rise and fall of civilizations and the ascent and descent of consciousness. This map is based on a cosmic law, the law of cyclical ascent and descent, moving in a spiral because awakening never unfolds in a straight linear upward line. It mirrors the same process we must undergo within ourselves, entering the darkness, purifying and transforming the lower nature, integrating the shadow, and descending into the light, or better said, bringing the light, divine down as integrated, spiritualized human beings. Not to escape life or even deny matter and materialism, but to spiritualize it. So this awakening process is an expansion on all levels. It brings up anything in us and in the world that is not in truth. So this map helps us to understand why the world is the way it is. And most importantly, what is now required from us as humanity moves into the next cycle. The ancient called this map the Great Year. It's a 24,000-year cycle with a 12,000-year descent and a 12,000-year ascent. It's also known as the Yuga Cycle. And right now we're at the end of the darkest one, the Kali Yuga. This knowledge of the Great Year, of the true Yuga Cycle, gives us a bigger picture view of what is happening, because we're entering an intensified transitional phase that always occurs between the yugas, between the ages. A period marked by societal collapse and cataclysmic natural events, just as many ancient civilizations before us have experienced. These cosmic and galactic forces are part of a larger evolutionary movement according to the Yuga Cycle. And we can actually mitigate what is coming if we understand the cycle and align ourselves with the next age that is emerging. Ultimately, it's really about learning our karmic lessons and aligning with Dharma and divine will. So in the first part of this podcast, we explore the larger cosmic framework behind the state of the world today. We will share the core insights from a book called The Yuga Shift by Bibodev Misra. It's a groundbreaking work that really systematically dispels the distortions, misconceptions, and false assumptions that have accumulated around the Yuga cycle over thousands of years. We'll examine the Kali Yuga, while we have been in the Kali Yuga Dark Age for over 5,000 years, how it manifests in the modern world, and why it is ending now in 2025, and what it actually means to enter the transitional phase between the Yugas into the next age. We'll also explore the potential coming cataclysmic changes as we're entering an intensified transitional phase and what is required from us to mitigate the destructive forces and align with the new cycle. Ultimately, part one sets the foundation for understanding where we are in this great arc of time and why the darkness around us is both really a necessary purge and a call to inner transformation. Now in part two for members, as always, part two is for our membership. If you're not a member yet, you can sign up on my website, veilofreality.com/membership, and get access to all part twos of all podcasts. So in part two, we will explore the time of transition. We've talked about this many, many times. I've used this word a lot as a spiritual threshold at the end of a vast cycle and where humanity stands between really destruction and conscious evolution. It also ties into the splitting of humanity we've addressed many, many times. And this term, the time of transition, comes from esoteric Christianity. So we look at through that lens, which talks about this transition and the potential also deluge of fire, both of which directly correspond to the purification phase between the yugas that we're entering now. And most importantly, we dive deeper into what it means to align with Dharma, with divine will. This is the most important lesson right now. Also the misconceptions about it, the danger of living someone else's Dharma, and what you can do in your personal life to align with the new cycle. We will also examine why transhumanism is a doomed dead end, an expression of the final phase of this dark age of materialism, and how the real solution lies in alignment with spirit. Most importantly, we will explore what it takes to stay aligned with the divine and how to become one of those seeds for the next cycle.
All right. So before we get into it, we have a quick announcement. We are going to relaunch Embodied Soul Awakening, which is our 14-week. It could change, actually. The time could be a little bit longer. It's a private online group coaching program. We do it live. It's in psychological and spiritual self-work. We took a longer break from this program in 2025, and we're going to relaunch it with some new material, more material on dreams and individuation, and just kind of update it to new things that we've learned over the years. So we're going to relaunch that we're going to start taking registration in January. So that's going to be at the beginning of next year. We do have a bunch of people on the waiting list. So I highly recommend, if you do want to join this new round, to go to thetimeoftransition.com and you can sign up to the waiting list. So we'll have a whole new version of it and everything will be on there. But if you've been waiting, now is your time, because we're really going to relaunch this with some new and updated material. And I'm really looking forward to that.
Yeah, and also put the link for it in the show notes of this episode.
Yeah.
So before we dive into this big topic, I want to really make a very important disclaimer to be very clear about it, because people can easily misconstrue this whole topic, as I've seen before. So this episode is definitely not about doom and gloom, any fear-mongering or black-pilled fantasies that the world is ending, right? It's very easy to use this kind of knowledge and filter it through trauma, black-pilled pessimism, or fear-based survival mode prepper mindset, which, as we'll explore, is actually not the solution at all. So this podcast is really about understanding the larger evolutionary forces that shape all of us and the greater arc of consciousness. It really helps us to explain the rise and fall of ancient civilizations over tens of thousands of years, and gives us a framework to align with truth in our higher nature. So for me personally, this knowledge is actually very grounding and inspiring, not fear-inducing at all. It actually helped me to focus even more on what truly matters, my inner alignment, my sincerity in the work, my dharma, my deeper purpose, and really embracing life and the unknown fully without fear. It really inspires me to engage more in life, whatever may come, because there are forces outside my control. So this is not about trying to escape anything, for there's also no safe physical place to begin with, anywhere in the world, and which we'll discuss in the podcast, but it's really more understanding the larger forces at work here. All right. So with that being said, let's dive into part one. And we want to start part one with an introduction to a book written by Bibhu Dev Misra. It's called Yuga Shift, The End of the Kali Yuga and the Impending Planetary Transformation, because a lot of this information is based on his research. And personally, I've studied the Yuga Cycle for many years on and off, but most of what I found was fragmented or contradictory, right? And some people already said the age of the Yuga Cycle already ended, or we're in the midst of it, or it's another 1,000 years. Many different versions are out there. But in my opinion, Misra really cuts through all that noise. He presents a clear, coherent case why the Kali Yuga ends around 2025 and why we're entering an intense transitional phase. He approaches really the Yuga Cycle, which I feel with both scientific rigor and esoteric understanding. He has spent many years comparing sources across civilizations, from the Vedic, Buddhist, Greek, Egyptian to Sumerian, Mayan, Hopi, Aztec, and many others, and really identified the threads that survived the long descent of the Kali Yuga. His research really draws from ancient Sanskrit texts like the Puranas and the Mahabharata, and most importantly, he cross-references all of these with other ancient cosmologies and world cycles, not just the Vedic teachings. He also, very important, integrates up-to-date modern scientific data like ice core records, impact evidence from comets and meteors, paleoclimatology, geology, astronomy, and the precession of the equinoxes. He even includes research on the Milky Way's central black hole entering active phases. It's interesting that the activity cycle of our galactic core, what the Vedic sages symbolically called Brahma, aligns with the rise and fall of consciousness on Earth. So by removing chronological errors, symbolic exaggerations, and cultural distortions that have been built up over thousands of years, he really reconstructs the original Yuga doctrine in a way that is consistent across all cultures and grounded in actual data. And in my opinion, this has resulted in a very clear picture of the great year, the Yuga Cycle, what it is, how long it lasts, and where we stand in the cycle today. So before we get into the actually real Yuga Cycle, I'm going to lay it all out for you guys. We need to really clear up some very common misconceptions that are around the Yuga Cycle, because a lot of people believe that we're already in a New Age ascension phase to 5D. No, that's not happening. We're also not entering the Golden Age, and we're also not already in the Dvapara Yuga. And the cycle is also not millions of years long and so forth. So one common belief, first misconception, is that the Yuga cycle lasts millions of years, with the Kali Yuga alone lasting 430,000 years. But Misra shows that this error came from multiplying the original numbers by 360 divine years. And earlier texts tell a very different story. So when you remove all the distortions, the full cycle actually matches the precessional period of 24,000 to 25,800 years, split into a 12,000 year descent and a 12,000 year ascent. Now, the second misconception is a very important one, because a lot of people have claimed that the Kali Yuga already ended and we are already in the ascending Dvapara Yuga. And that idea is very common in New Age circles and also modern Vedic astrology, claiming that the Kali Yuga ended in the 1600s or 1700s, and we've already entered the ascending Dvapara Yuga. This claim was also, some people would maybe know, largely popularized through Sri Yukdevar's The Holy Science, where he presented a simplified symbolic model of a much shorter Yuga duration, right? And people also assume that rising scientific discoveries and this whole technological progress means that we are already in what they call the age of energy. But Misra really shows that this misunderstanding comes from combining two things that never really were meant to be combined. Number one, the interpretation depended on a misstated starting point to begin with of the Kali Yuga, which actually came from Persian astronomers and does not appear in the original Vedic text. And he proves this in his book. And also very important to point out that Sri Yukdevar's system was not meant to override the original doctrine, but to illustrate an inner consciousness shift in a simplified cycle. It was a symbolized cycle. So, as Misra shows, when you actually use the actual Yuga length from the earlier source, it becomes clear that we have been in a descending Kali Yuga followed by ascending Kali Yuga. There's two Yuga cycles back to back. We'll talk about this more shortly. But obviously, Misra also doesn't dismiss Yuktesar's insights in holy sciences as a whole. He says, obviously, that Yuktesar was correct about the ascending and descending ages, about focusing on consciousness rather than a geological timeline. But Yuktesar created a symbolic teaching model and not a historical timeline. And also from a common sense logic perspective, if you were already 500 years into the Dvapara Yuga, the higher level of consciousness, the world would look very different. We would see actually way more unity, less conflict, fewer wars, healthier families, less materialism, and more grounded, clearer morality, and a decline in mental illness and so forth. But instead, we see the opposite. The last century alone, we brought two grand world wars, more polarization, and really an extreme form of materialism that's culminating now in transhumanism and in AI. So these are all signs of the Kali Yuga intensifying, actually. And Misra also stresses that this is very important, that technological advancement or scientific breakthroughs are not evidence of a higher consciousness. Rapid technological growth is actually expected in the ascending Kali Yuga. It doesn't mean that we're already in the Dvapara Yuga. So according to the ancient timelines, we're exactly where we should be, at the end of the Kali Yuga, entering a turbulent ekpyrosis period, which we also talk about, the long purification between the ages. And the last misconception I want to also point out, which also I believe for the longest time, but I was wrong, that Kali Yuga has nothing to do with the goddess Kali, right? Kali in the Yuga context simply means one, the number one, referring to the bull of Dharma standing on a single leg. And the four Yugas were named 4, 3, 2, 1. And they represent the gradual loss of Dharma through each age. And the Kali Yuga is the age where only 1/4 of Dharma remains. So it describes basically a condition of consciousness. It's not a deity and has really nothing to do whatsoever with the goddess Kali. So, with that being said, I want to now summarize what the Yuga cycle is actually about. And obviously, if you want to get way more insight into that, read the book. It's really in-depth work. It's really scholarly work. I would not even say it's easy reading, but he makes a really compelling case for what I'm about to share here. So, again, Misra reconstructed us this living map of how human consciousness rises and falls over a full great year, a Yuga cycle. And according to Misra, the complete Yuga cycle is about 25,800 years, which matches the precession of the equinoxes. Some of you heard about the precession of the equinoxes. It's a slow wobble of the Earth's axis that shifts the spring equinox through the 12 constellations over one full rotation. And many other ancient cultures saw this cycle, this precession of the equinoxes, as the great cosmic clock. And a great full year is divided into 4 ages, and each lasts about 2,700 years with a 300-year transitional purification period between them. So we start at the top, which is the Satya Yuga, which is the Golden Age. Then it goes down to the Treta Yuga, the Silver Age, then the Dvapara Yuga, the Bronze Age, and the Kali Yuga, which we're in right now, the Iron Age or the Dark Age. And important to understand, between each age, after the Treta Yuga to the Dvapara Yuga to the Kali Yuga, is a 300-year purification transitional phase. And on top of that, there are 2 major 1,200-year purification phases. One is right after the Golden Age, which is called Cataclysmos, literally means the Great Flood, and one 1,200-year purification phase after the Kali Yuga, when we go up again into the ascent, into the upper yugas. And it's called ekpirosis, which is called, literally means purification by fire. So when you add all the 4 ages, the 300-year transitional phases between some of the yugas, plus the 2 long transitional phases, the whole timeline fits the 25,800-year precessional cycle almost exactly. You can really imagine the Yuga cycle as a big circle divided into 2 halves. You can see that image actually. I have an image from Misra's book in the show notes on my website for this episode, so you can see it also visually to check it out. So the right half is the descending arc when consciousness declines from the Golden Age into deep materialism of the Dark Age. And the left half is the ascending arc when consciousness slowly rises out of the Kali Yuga up towards the next Golden Age. And at the very bottom of the wheel, the lowest point is where we are right now.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the Golden Age, the Satya Yuga, the age that I wish that I incarnated into, but unfortunately, this is my own karma. So on top of the cycle is the Satya Yuga, and this is when human beings lived in direct alignment with truth, harmony, and the divine. So contact with spiritual beings was normal. We had telepathy, extended lifespans. In the Vedic text, it's actually written that humans in that age lived for thousands of years, and their bodies were less dense and more luminous, as well as we were much taller and stronger than the average humans nowadays. Illness did not exist as we know it. Knowledge gained through direct experience, not external learning or mental learning. There was no need for religion or temples because everyone lived naturally in connection with the divine. Deception, exploitation, and manipulation were absent, and therefore there was also no need for government or institutions. And then we go through this descent from the Golden Age. So as a cycle moves downward from the Golden Age through the Tetra to the Dwapara Yuga into the Kali Yuga, consciousness slowly loses its natural unity with the divine, and it becomes more dense, more fragmented, and more ego-centered. So lifespans tend to shorten, our intelligence and physical strength start to weaken, illness, disease, and suffering arise, as well as rituals, scriptures, temples, and spiritual practices. They only emerged after the Golden Age because humans lost their natural connection to the divine. So they needed these places to reconnect with them. Our own inner guidance and ability to align with God weakened. People then started looking externally for guidance, and thus started a whole, thousands and thousands year cycle of manipulation and corruption due to our own ignorance, basically. So the arc of this decline is what many myths describe symbolically. It's a fall from unity into separation. And by the time we enter the later ages, intuitive spiritual insights fade, materialism grows, and power is pursued for personal gain. And you can even see this in this age where intuition is seen as being, number one, a lot of us actually don't have connection to our intuition because we're identified with our mind and our intellect. And on top of it, intuition is even seen as something to be denigrated or dismissed or something that can't be scientifically proven. So we've not only lost connection to that ourselves, but in popular, materialistic, mainstream, atheistic culture, it's seen as something to be completely dismissed and isn't even real to begin with. So And then we reached the Kali Yuga. So this is when the cycle reached its lowest point in the Iron Age. It's a cycle of darkness, ignorance, fragmentation. We're spiritually disconnected and blind, and morally we decline. So we're in a descent of consciousness. We're even more forgetful of our true nature. We've lost a lot of the ancient knowledge, or the ancient knowledge that we have access to is very corrupted, which is why it's been so difficult to even reconstruct the real Yuga cycle, as Misra pointed out in his book. As ego consciousness grows more separate from God and the divine, it also begins to draw in darker influences. People start engaging with spirits and entities in manipulative ways, even invoking hostile beings to gain power. And this descent opened the door for the rise of evil and what Rudolf Steiner would call the spirits of darkness. They began to influence humanity from the subtle realms. They feed on suffering, polarization, and us being fragmented. So by the time we reach the Kali Yuga, our spiritual senses are almost fully lost, and the separation from the divine is very wide, and thus also our inner division is also deep, because the more fragmented we are inside, the more disconnected we are from God. And the hostile forces, the negative spiritual forces, have the greatest access to us, and they feed on our fear, our desire, our ignorance, violence, and the lower nature. So understanding the characteristics of the Kali Yuga and the descent of consciousness explains why evil and dark forces have such a grip on humanity. They're stronger, they're better organized than the forces of light, as Sri Aurobindo pointed out, which is why psycho-spiritual work and bringing down the light is like a battle and a spiritual war in these times, because we're almost like swimming upstream in these ages. And even your spiritual practices will seem harder because of the era that we're living in. So I also want to talk about the double Kali Yuga. So we haven't just been living through one Kali Yuga, but two back-to-back Kali Yugas, a descending phase and an ascending phase that continued immediately after. And this adds up to roughly 5,700 years in total. So the descending Kali Yuga marked the deepest fall into darkness, where consciousness hits its lowest point and humanity became almost fully cut off from higher realities. And the ascending Kali Yuga marks a slow upward turn, but the spiritual light is still faint. Our connection to God is still building. It's not as powerful as it used to be in the previous ages. And so we have this progress of materialism. There's a slow rediscovery of ancient knowledge. There's growing individuality. There's technological breakthroughs. There's material comforts. There's global connectivity. However, spiritual consciousness still remains severely degraded. And even worse, it's actually in popular culture, a lot of people who kind of take on a predominantly materialist worldview, it's not only degraded, but it's denigrated. It's put down. It's seen as lesser than. It's seen as like woo-woo. So, and this is why the world today shows this extreme technological advancement and unprecedented material comfort, while many are disconnected from God, the divine, a higher spiritual reality. I even get people triggered when I use the word God, which to me is like a reflection of how far gone we are. And then there's even the distortion of God. Like there's people using the term God and in very distorted ways and having all of these ideas that God judges us as sinners, and this very dark and shameful view of God, to me, is also a reflection of this era that we live in. So this imbalance basically leads to hypermaterialism, where also we become mentally overstimulated. A lot of people are very dissociated. We also have ideological extremism, scientific religious dogma, global control systems. We have a lot of corruption in the world. And there's this huge gap between the way that we've developed materially and the way we've developed spiritually, which is one of the clearest signatures of the ascending Kali Yuga, this gap between the material development and our spiritual development. And it also results in the splitting of humanity, where one part of humanity is answering this inner call and engaging with spiritual work and aligning with Dharma, while another part will get even further entrapped in materialism, especially through the incoming religion or ideology of transhumanism. So many ancient traditions describe this back-to-back Kali Yuga as a night within the night. So, okay, let's go into some of the signs of the Kali Yuga. And this is one of the main things that I also think about, because I've mentioned the Kali Yuga before in other posts, just in passing. And I've noticed that a lot of people bring in Sri Yuktesar's idea that we're actually in the Dwapara Yuga. And to me, like, you just have to look around you and to see how the world is to indicate. Like, you can't just do it philosophically and mentally. You have to actually observe how the world is and to see if we're what Yuga cycle we're in. So some of the signs of the Kali Yuga are disconnected from spirit, loss of inner guidance, moral inversion. We also have hypermaterialism, identification with the body, hypersexualization, and the fixation on lower expressions of sex, money, power. Even if you look at the popular culture of our age, it's not really coming from a divine impulse. It's more coming from the lower nature, the lower shadow realms. It seems to be coming from a more darker expression of humanity's nature. We also have rising narcissism and superficiality. We also have a loss of intelligence that also shows up in loss of attention span. A lot of us are not thinking for ourselves. We're just repeating things that other people have said and think in a very mechanical way. And then there's a loss of connection to the sacred, a loss of meaning. This has kind of been accelerated, especially since the quote unquote age of enlightenment, is that we've become disconnected from our place in the cosmos, and what's substituted it has been materialism, basically. And then we have nihilism. We have atheism as a dominant worldview. We have a lot of psychic fragmentation. There's also an insane amount of corruption and distortion of spirituality and religion as well. We also have, obviously, which is really even becoming more predominant in the past 5 years, an ongoing sense of polarization and conflict. We have this extremely rapid technological growth that seems to be even accelerating, but it's disconnected from spiritual awareness, from wisdom. We also have ecological destruction and the suppression of the feminine, which has been extremely accelerating even the past thousands of years, when we took out goddess worship from the religions. It's been focused on the male aspect of God and not focusing on the immanent aspect of God in nature and the divine all around us. We also have declining fertility, vitality, declining health in general, and also the breakdown of authentic human relationships and community, as well as a rebellion against natural and divine order. So according to Mizra's reconstruction, we are now at the end of the ascending Kali Yuga, and the date that he arrived at is around 2025. And he goes into much detail in this book why this year marks the end of the Kali Yuga. So if you disagree, read the book and then tell us your arguments after you do your research.
Yes.
And this places us right at the entry into the great transition, the ekpyrosis phase.
Ekpyrosis.
Ekpyrosis,
yes.
sorry.
No worries. So let's dive into that, the ekpyrosis phase. Very important to understand. So again, go to the show notes to see the whole Yuga cycle with the different transitional phases, because between the Tetra Yuga, the Dvapara Yuga, down to the Kali Yuga, there are 300-year transitional phases, but they're, again, two big 1,200-year transitional phases. The first one was Cataclysmos after the Golden Age, and now after the Kali Yuga, what we're entering now is the ekpyrosis phase. And that transitional period lasts about 1,200 years. And it marks really the collapse of the old world and the seeding of the next evolutionary stage. So we're not entering the Dvapara Yuga until 1,200 years from now. Like, this is the preparation for the next age. And ekpyrosis is from Greek and means literally burning up completely, or purification through fire. So ekpyrosis represents destruction that burns away the accumulated corruption of the Dark Age, the Kali Yuga. It represents the collapse of materialistic civilizations, exposure of moral and spiritual decay. It's the beginning of the upward movement towards a higher consciousness. And when humanity faces a decisive crossroads, again, ties into the splitting of humanity we've talked about many, many times before, bifurcation. So in Greek Stoic cosmology, as Mizra pointed out, ekpyrosis was the moment the world is consumed in fire and then renewed. And Misra's research ties that then into periods of extreme solar activity, polar shifts, the Milky Way's galactic center getting activated, and increased comet and asteroid impacts related to the Taurid comet swarm. We'll talk more about this shortly. Also, earth changes, earthquakes, volcanic activity, atmospheric climate change, and all of that. And as well, worldwide conflict, potential religious wars, and social breakdowns, and so forth, civil wars. And we've seen a lot of that already, and that may intensify over the next transitional phase. So just a short note, I want to talk about Cataclysmus II, which was the 1,200-year transitional era after the Golden Age. And that was also marked by geological upheaval, but flooding, purification by water, was melting ice sheets, rising sea levels, and it totally times in with the same time when high civilizations like Atlantis existed and sank into the ocean, as the legends go. And again, cataclysmus literally means washing down or flooding. So we have a lot of these flood myths, even the Bible and all of that, throughout cultures. And we will talk more about scientific evidence shortly as well, but just to point it out right now that there are ice core records and archaeological disruptions around 10,800 to 9,600 BCE, which all match exactly this period of cataclysmus. So now we are approaching ekpyrosis, the purge that closes out the Kali Yuga. So closing for the Yuga cycle, the Yuga framework in a nutshell is basically a cosmic clock rooted in the movement of the earth, the cycles of the heavens and the rise and fall, most importantly of human consciousness. It's a map of ascent and descent of human consciousness. This is most important point to understand. But each Yuga has distinct qualities representing certain levels of consciousness, and each transition involves purification. So right now, we are at the hinge point between decline and renewal. The collapse we're seeing is the predictable expression really at the end of an age and the early labor pains of a new one. We're literally entering a birth canal into a new world that will be based on a much higher level of consciousness. I've written and talked about this for many, many years, this time of transition. So let's talk about this destructive phase at the end of Kali Yuga, because it actually lines up with real astronomical cycles. And Misra definitely proves that scientifically in his book as well, with potential periods of intensified comet and meteor activity. The most important one of this is the so-called Taurid stream. And the Taurid stream is a field of all kinds of debris of a massive comet that shattered tens of thousands of years ago. And that breakup created a long tube of debris. It contains of dust, rocks, dormant comets, meteors, asteroid-sized fragments, all kinds of stuff. And most years, Earth passes through the outer, more the harmless edges of the stream, which we see as meteor showers when we go out and see shooting stars. You know, there's a period of a time we all enjoy that. That's part of the Taurid stream. But as Misra showed, and astronomers have proven that as well, every 2,000 to 3,000 years, the Earth actually moves into the densest region of this Taurid comet stream. And that crossing aligns with rapid climate change, climate swings, civilization collapse, world-changing destructive events, and so forth. And each destructive window of this Taurid stream encounter, the densest region, lasts a few centuries. And that's exactly the same length as the 300-year Yuga transitions between the Yugas. So in short, the return cycle of the Taurid stream matches the 2,700-year spacing of the Yugas and their transition. Very, very interesting, quote-unquote, coincidence there. So how did the ancients describe these comets and all that? Well, there's a lot of writings in the ancient scriptures calling these comets as gods in the sky, right? They didn't see them as abstract objects. For them, they were actually divine forces or gods returning in the heavens and resetting or purifying the world. They were seen as living celestial beings. They saw them as intervals to clean up or even judge the world. And cultures gave the comets divine names because of their overwhelming power and what were projected into it. So Misra goes very deep into this topic as well in this book, but just to give you some examples, in the Rig Veda, one of the most ancient scriptures, there is the talk about the Maruts, which is a fiery meteor swarm matching the two Taurid streams, right? That aligns with that. And there's also the talk of a massive horse comet named Indra that has shattered ice dams, resulting in floods and reshaped the world, according to the Rig Veda. So you really see it across all different cultures, also in China, Greece, Near East, Mesoamerica. They all had different names, Quetzalcoatl, many others for these heavens messengers. But most importantly, there's a lot of scientific evidence that supports these past torrid catastrophes and also support the symbolism of these ancient cultures, which we just went through and how they named these comets. So most researchers agree now that the Younger Dryas, that was a sudden massive ecological disruption that happened about 12,800 years ago and lasted, interestingly, about 1,200 years, was triggered by cosmic impacts, fragments from a larger comet, and that affected everything, reshaped landscapes, flooded coastlines, and so forth. And the Younger Dryas fits the Yuga framework perfectly. Right at the end of the Satya Yuga, the Golden Age, corresponds exactly to Plato's date for the sinking of Atlantis. And Mizra cites leading comet researchers like Klug, Napier, Asher, Steele, and Bailey, who all agree on this periodic danger of the torrid comet complex coming back around about every 2,500 years or so. So obviously we're entering now a major transition right now. And Mizra's point is that we may experience this torrid comet stream again at the beginning of this ekpyrosis, a more prolonged encounter, so to speak. And in his research, he notes that the time from 2030 to 2040, especially between the years 2032 and 2036, are elevated risk years when the Earth will align with this torrid cluster, right? And again, these dates have also been modeled and confirmed by the aforementioned astronomers, but obviously mainstream institutions rarely discuss it, right? And it also raises the question if they're even prepared to address something like this. In other words, some people in places of high power may know about this, but don't want to panic the masses, right? And again, not get into doom and gloom, fear-mongering. It's not a guaranteed impact, but a significant potentiality. The key is not prediction, but understanding a pattern, right? And also understanding that this torrid comet stream appears at every major Yuga transition, at both the minor 300-year transition and the more intense 1,200-year window we're in right now. So that is really the cosmic backdrop for this time of transition we're in right now. It's not about getting hooked on specific predictions. Nothing changes in my life, just wait and see. I'm just more focused, again, in the inner work. And that's what we'll talk about right now, what really matters. Because the fear way out, as Mizra also said, is not fear or survivalism, but something way deeper, right? So it doesn't mean that the world is ending and we should stand on the street corner holding a sign like, repent, the end is near, right? Or we don't need to just pack our bags and look for some safe location, build bunkers and prepare for all the apocalypse. No. And this is a very important point. Mizra and all the ancient teachings make the same point. They're very clear about it. Even the Hopi said that. This is not about fear-mongering, panic, or frantic survival mode. There's no also external deity punishing us. This is not God being angry with us or some distorted religious idea, right? This is a purification process to help us to return to truth, align with Dharma. This is the most important part, and embody the divine within. And understanding the Yuga cycle is just part of the Earth's long history. It's not about physically escaping what is coming, but understanding really the deeper message, align with the next cycle. So, and remember, the Yuga cycle is rooted in a cosmic law, as I mentioned at the beginning, the rhythm of descent and ascent, the law of ascent and descent, moving in a spiral, not a straight line. So every fall into darkness, even collectively, is followed by a rise into a greater light, higher. And each turn of the spiral brings humanity to higher levels of consciousness than before. Again, this mirrors our inner journey. We also need to descend into our unconscious, meet our shadow, purify, transform our lower nature, and then rise up with more awareness, more embodiment to the divine. So again, the goal is not to escape the world or transcend the body, it's to spiritualize them. It's to bring the light down into matter so we become more receptive instruments of the divine force. So that also means that this spiral process, that the next golden age we're moving towards over the next 12,000 years, will not be a repetition of the last golden age. It will be actually built on a higher octave, a higher consciousness, and because every cycle carries the evolution of the divine and matter a step further up on the spiral. But again, if we don't learn our lesson during this time of transition, we might experience what other sages and masters, including Sri Aurobindo and the mother, called a dark night of civilization. Even Sri Aurobindo himself said, "I cannot promise that the divine's will is to preserve the current civilization. The present civilization must change, but whether by destruction or a new construction on the basis of greater truth is the issue." Right? Even Carl Jung talked about increasing cataclysmic changes if we don't attempt to integrate our shadow. That's what it comes down to. So important to understand is one of the biggest blind spots in modern worldview is the belief that natural disasters we see today, hurricanes, earthquakes, wildfires, or abnormal weather, climate change, is all caused only by humans. And you have two sides. The mainstream culture blames CO2 and pollution, right? And conspiracy culture blames geoengineering, chemtrails, direct energy weapons, and HAARP, right? Yes, climate change is real, but not for the reasons what people assume. So what the erratic weather changes, even wildfires, earthquakes, hurricanes, all of that, climate change is already a sign of the impending purification transitional phase of atmospheric change, of something happen through the cosmic energies, including solar activity, including the polar shift, all of this. It's already part of the planetary purification process, right? It is not just us humans doing everything. The idea that humans are fully control of the weather and manipulating or polluting it, and that's why all the weather anomalies are happening, is actually a sign, ironically, of the deep materialistic view of the Kali Yuga, right? That doesn't dismiss pollution or ecological destruction, which we are also doing, or the reality of geoengineering. I absolutely think that's happening, but it does mean that there are far larger forces at work, forces beyond human control, beyond human technology, and far more ancient and powerful. And this is part of this Yuga shift right now. Some people also say that the elites know about the cosmic cataclysms and have already built their bunkers and prepared physically, but they're also stuck in materialistic ignorance. Again, no physical preparation will save you from what is happening. And even Misra was very clear in his book, right? He emphasizes that spiritual preparation, alignment with Dharma, is far more important than building bunkers or getting into survival prepper mode. He literally says, quote, "You cannot buy your way to the next Yuga and the ascending cycle. No matter how much wealth you have or what a big shot you are or how many underground shelters you build. You will not be able to make it to the next Yuga unless you transform yourself and align with Dharma. Don't waste time building shelters. Work on your consciousness." And that's mirrored even by the Hopis, who have been aware of these cycles, for ages as well. Here's a quote from the Hopis. Quote, "It is only materialistic people who seek to make shelters. Those who are at peace in their hearts already are in the great shelter of life. There's no shelter for evil. Those who take no part in the making of world division by ideology are ready to resume life in another world." So that's where we are at us right now. It's a soul that matters, who you are and what you align with. And that, again, goes back to the inner work, psychospiritual work, alignment with the divine within, to become a receptive force for the divine and align with Dharma.
So basically, to summarize, it's our level of consciousness or the lack of it that's directly connected to these potential cataclysmic changes. And the transition out of the Kali Yuga is not about physical survival. It's not about technological advancement, but a return to Dharma, right living, inner alignment, spiritual purpose. And we can mitigate what's happening through our sincere inner work and inner purification. So when we're tuning, basically we're meant to more tune into the era that's coming rather than identify with the era that we're in. And this involves a return to Dharma, an alignment with God, to give yourself to God, to make your purpose an instrument of higher will. And essentially it's a path of karma yoga, self-transformation and deep inner work in everyday life without trying to escape it. So those who align with Dharma and purify their consciousness are going to be more likely to withstand the turmoil of this transition and actually be guided to where they need to be. So it's really important you don't act on fear-based thinking, stuck in survival mode. And in other words, as Misra says in his book, the real task is not just to survive, but to awaken. And so as we move through this ekpyrosis phase. Is that my saying? Ekpyrosis phase and the purification between the yugas. It's really important that we chose to be here. If you're here at this time and era, this is part of a larger karmic necessity. We chose to incarnate, to burn off karmic residue, to take part of this transition into the next cycle. A lot of us, that's why we have a lot of experience, I would argue, with death and rebirth, because that's kind of the essence of this cycle. And Steiner also spoke about it himself, even speaking to these cataclysms and natural disasters. And he says, up above in the spiritual worlds, human souls are gathered together in groups according to their karma. They are elaborating their karma in conformity with their past and future existence. And as we see, one of these groups of human souls wander to religions situated, for example, in the vicinity of volcanoes or to districts where earthquakes are liable to occur, in order to receive their destiny from the elemental phenomena of nature. We can even find that such places are very deliberately chosen by the souls thus karmically connected in order that they may experience this very destiny. For a thought which finds little understanding in our souls on earth, such as a thought, I choose a great disaster on earth in order to become more perfect. I choose it because I am still so far from fulfilling what lies in my past karma. Such a thought for which, as I have said, there is so little understanding in earthly life can be present in the life between death and a new birth, and there has an inherent value. So in more or less words, we choose even difficult situations and circumstances because we understand that it will be an accelerated process of burning off karma.
Yeah, exactly. And before we end this first hour, the most important takeaway from this is, the future is not set in stone. There might be a lot of upheaval, even cataclysmic upheaval, comet bombardment, all that. Absolutely. It's written all over. The ancients talked about this, but we can mitigate it. We can lessen the effect through our inner purifications, either outer purifications or inner purification. So I want to be very clear about it. That's why the psychospiritual work, the inner work, alignment with Dharma, your Dharma, is the most important work. As the mother Mira Alfaza said, quote, she says, this courage, this heroism, when what the divine wants of us, why not use it to fight against one's own difficulties, one's own imperfection, one's own obscurities? Why not heroically face the furnace of inner purification so that it does not become necessary to pass once more through one of those terrible, gigantic destructions which plunge an entire civilization into darkness? So she said this many, many decades ago, so clearly aware of this transitional phase we're going through right now. So was Sri Aurobindo. So with that being said, in the second hour, we will explore more of this, what this time of transition really is about as a spiritual threshold at the end of this vast Kali Yuga cycle. We look at this transition through the lens of esoteric Christianity, what Gurdjieff had to talk about, and many others. We will talk about the time of transition and the delusion of fire from the perspective of other traditions, both of which directly respond to the purification phase between the Kali Yuga and the Dvapara Yuga and the ekpyrosis we're in right now. And then most importantly, we dive deeper in what it means to align with Dharma, because Misra in his book and many other mirroring the message of other teachings said this is the most important part, to align with Dharma. But there are a lot of misconceptions about it. So we address the misconceptions, the danger of living someone else's Dharma instead of your own. Most importantly, we look into how to find your Dharma and what you can do in your personal life to align with the next cycle. We'll also examine why transhumanism is actually a doomed dead end, an expression of the final phase of the dark age of materialism. It's a dead end, ties into the eighth sphere of Rudolf Steiner's cosmology, and how the real solution lies in the inner alignment with spirit. So if you're not a member yet, go to my website, veilofreality.com/membership. You can sign up to the second hour there, and we'll be right back.